Hi there, Titans. My name is Paige, and today we are going to be talking about the best practices when working with variables. Now, in this video, I'm going to be switching back and forth between the PowerPoint presentation where I'll answer your questions, give you some good visual learning abilities to comprehend the items I'll be covering, and then I'm going to switch over and show you all of these concepts in our Titan Web projects. So let's get started. The questions that I will be discussing today are: what are variables and parameters? What are the different kinds of variables in formula fields? What is the difference between a project parameter and a page parameter? What are strip parameters and when will we be using them? What are the read-only functions and when would we be using those for parameters? How can a URL parameter be used? And what does save to local storage do? And lastly, how can I review and troubleshoot my parameters in my projects? So I'm really excited to learn and discuss everything with you guys today, and I'm excited to see how this discussion will enhance your web projects. So before we dive into our Titan web platform, let's just go over what are variables and parameters. And are these terms interchangeable? Yes, they are, and as you interact in Titan Web, you'll see both variables and parameters, and you'll hear us say them too, and just know that they are the same thing and we're referring to the same concept. Variables are used to contain and pass data that's necessary for Salesforce integration or your other processes that will happen through your form, but that we do not necessarily want our end users to see. And they have actually replaced what we used to use as hidden fields in Titan Forms if you were someone who used Titan Forms before. So we got rid of hidden fields because they were taking up a lot of space on the builder and kind of limited the amount of functionality and formatting that we could provide our users. So parameters are not seen when you are building your form, but they can be accessed and seen in debug mode. So you're able to review the parameters and their values. And on top of that, we also have the calculated fields that are no longer a part of, they're not in Titan Web, but instead we have several different types of formula fields that we'll go over in the next slide that are more robust than the previous calculated field was. So here is a little chart that I created for us so that we can go over what are the different types of variables and formula fields and when would we be using each of them. So there are 5 different types of variables and formula fields. The first is the system fields, and let's just go over this together. In our web builder, we can access the project parameters by going to Tools and then Custom Variables. And here you can see the system variable, static variable, numeric, string, custom, JS. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the system variable, and you can add it right here and see that it is a default value right here, and you're able to select a default value that relates to the end user's experience, their location, their device, and many other options. You can even do like a random number if you'd like. But the important part of the system variable is that it can only be one of these values, and you should not add a system variable to assign it a unique value later on. That should be used for static. So as I said, static fields can be used to store values from Salesforce or your project elements, other variables, or really any static value at all. Let's look at the static value. So the static variables here is where you create something like maybe a contact ID, and then you leave it blank, and later on this can be populated and set from other elements in either Salesforce or in your project. Many of you will be using static variables often as it's a way to ensure that you have proper Salesforce integration and robust web projects that include many records and data from your Salesforce environment. So now let's review our various formula fields. The numeric formula field is very similar to what we used to use with our calculated field in Titan Forms, as it can execute mathematical equations using the project elements or other variables to give us a new calculation. Whereas a string formula field, it can be a concatenation of string and text and combine other elements or variables to create a new combined value. And then the custom JS fields are an ability to personalize outputs by using your own JS script. And we have even provided a format for you to use to make sure that you have the correct output. So let's review these three together. So let's go into our project parameters. And here you can see our three formula fields. So let's add a numeric one here together. I'll just call it number for now. And then I'm going to configure this. So here's where I can select a field from my project, and I'm going to be using number of pets, and then I'm going to add 230 to that. Okay, and something that's very important with all of our formula fields is that you cannot have a condition set off of the formula fields. So all three of these, if you're going to have a condition, say if this is greater than 250, then do something, then I need to map it to another variable. So say I map it to variable 1 here, and then I can click apply. And let's do our string here and do our string. We'll call this one string. And then we're going to configure this. So strings can be a combination of things. So I'm going to do account, and then say buyers, and then I'm just going to add in another field here, type value. Okay, so that is my string, and then the custom JS, call it JS, and you can see when we click configure, this is the format that you will follow. And right now it just says let A equal 5, return A. So if I were to say let A return 5,000, then when we return A, it's going to be 5,000. So I'm going to click apply, save, and let's just preview reviewing these formulas and together. So you can see my account already equals Barnes & Noble, and I'm going to make my number of pets equal 40. I have a lot of pets. Okay, so let's look at our debug mode. You can see that the number was, remember, 40 plus 230, so now I have 270, and then I also passed it to my variable 1. I mapped it to that, so that's why variable 1 also equals 270. And you can see Barnes & Noble's buyers is the string, and then the JS is now 5,000. So that is my variables and their values in the debug mode. And let's move on to our next question. So let's get to one of the most important questions of the day. What is the difference between page parameters and project parameters? And I'm sure some people are even hearing this and saying, what? Like there's two different types of parameters? And yes, so we have page parameters and project parameters. Page parameters are only live on the page that that parameter is assigned to, whereas project parameters can be live and active and activated across the entire project and every page as the user goes through it. And same for like the conditional logic and integrations. So you can only really have things be affected by page parameter if you are on that page, if the user is on that page. and the integrations. If you're going to be pushing or pulling data to or from Salesforce to or from a page parameter, then that also has to be, it has to be on, that action has to be on that page too. Whereas a project parameter, whether you're, it's live throughout the entire project, and so therefore you can push or pull data to or from Salesforce, from or to a project parameter, no matter where the user is on the project. And you may be thinking, well, why don't I just use project parameters for every single value that I need as a variable? And there are some cons to project parameters actually, because so with the conditions on a page parameter, it's only active and it can only be like executed when you're on that page. Whereas with a project parameter, that condition will be executed on every single page load and it remains active on every single page. So this can affect the performance and speed of your projects. It can also affect other things. It can be very, volatile and easy to, cause problems. So make sure that you only use project parameters for the big picture IDs and values that will truly be used throughout the entire project, because you do not want it to be slowing down and affecting the performance of your projects. So the page parameters can be passed page to page, so you don't have to think like that the value is going to be forever gone, because you can carry it with you. You just need to pass that value from one page parameter to the next page parameter, and therefore that value can affect conditions and be used for Salesforce integrations across the project. Whereas for project parameters, because it's live across the entire project, it never needs to be passed. It can be used at any point, but like I said before, just make sure that it is a value that is important enough to be carried with you throughout the entire project. And then I have also given you guys steps to set those parameters, whether it's page parameter or project parameter, and I'll show you that in just a second. Just bear with me. And then the last thing I want to talk about is that the page parameters cannot be used as a URL parameter, but the project parameters can be used as a URL parameter. So let's look at our Titan Web Builder and talk about where these page and project parameters are. The page parameters will be added by going to Pages, click on, or not click on your page, but you'll scroll over your different pages. Right now I only have one page. And then on these three dots here, you can go to Configure Actions. And this is where you will see all of the variables that are on that page. And so you can see that I actually have none right here. So let's just add in a static variable called home page parameter. Awesome. Apply. And then I'll show you where you can do your project parameters. That is where I was before under custom variables. These are the project parameters, and you can see all of the project parameters that I have set up with us earlier, and that they were not on the page parameter. So I'm just gonna add another page so that you can see in the debug mode that it is not, the page parameter is not live here. So to do that, I just need to go back to my home page, save, and then I'm going to have this button. I'm not going to do a Salesforce action, but instead I'm just going to make it go to the next page. Cool. All right. Save. And now let's preview this. So when we're on our home page, we can look at the debug mode and you can see all of those project parameters that I assigned earlier. And you can see the home page parameter, which it is blank right now. You can also see that it says page variable right here. Rather than variable, it says page variable. So that's a great way to tell the difference between the two. And now let's just go to the next page by clicking this button and watch my debug mode. I'm scrolling and I can't see anything else. So I do not have that old page parameter. It is now dead on page 2 unless I were to pass that value onto the page 2 parameter, or created a page 2 parameter and then pass the value to it. Cool. So what are strip parameters and when do we use them? And I know you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, Paige, there's another level of parameters. Like, what is a strip parameter? But don't worry, it's not that intense. Strip parameters only used whenever you're using the repeated strips or repeated columns. And think about it like if you're pulling in lots of different records from using repeated strips or repeated columns, then you may need to know like what the contact ID or record ID is for each one of those records that you're pulling in. That's a very common use case for when you would be needing to have a parameter that is for an individual strip. So yeah, like I said, they're used to store unique values for individual records stored within the repeated strip or repeated column. I've also included the steps for how to add a strip or column parameter, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. And I will also show you what it looks like whenever you're finding those variables, whenever you're mapping your Salesforce integrations, or whenever you're setting conditions on those elements. So let's just hop right in. So say, let's just add in a strip like so. If you do not know how to add in a strip, this is how you do it. And we can make it skinny like that. And say we were going to like have some text fields that are, I'll just call this account, make it really simple, or bring back some accounts. Cool. Lovely. And to make it a repeated strip, well, you can see repeat column, and we could do that and repeat the column. But if we want to do a repeated strip, then I'll just come over here, click on this strip. You can see it's highlighted, and then I'll go in here and say repeat. And so we could have, the column repeat or the strip repeat, doesn't matter. But my column is like very wide. But if I were to have like add in another column like this, let's add in another column. Oh, I'm not doing it right before. So say like we had multiple columns within the strip, then we repeated the column, then like the first one would be here, the second one would be here, the third one would be like down here, the fourth one would be down here, etc. You can watch my whole video on strips and columns if you'd like. But the point is today we're talking about variables. So let's just delete this column. Yes, so I delete it. Okay. And then I'm going to go to my strip, and it's already repeated. And so now that it's repeated, when I clicked on that, you can see the custom variables shows up. And this is where I can set my variables for the specific column. And that means that the variable will be unique for each column that it repeats. So we'll call this account ID. There we go. Cool. And now I'm just gonna set up a quick little Salesforce get so we can get this information. Count, strip, repeat. Okay. We're gonna do no condition. And so here is where we will see that repeated strip. I can see my repeated strip account ID. That is the variable that I set up. So I'm going to find this is from Salesforce, so I'll put the account ID there. And then the repeat strip account name, I'm gonna put the name of the account there. Lovely. Okay, apply. And that's gonna happen on load, which is cool. And then let's save and watch this happen. We're gonna get a bunch of accounts. like a bunch. Oh. Wow, or just one. Whoops. What did I do wrong here? Oh, that's what I did wrong. So the first record I want up to, like, let's just say 10. We're not going to go too crazy. We're just going to get the first 10. So that was my mistake. We all make mistakes. Okay. Save and preview. So now we can see the first 10 accounts, and you can see their account name, but let's take a look at their strip values. Strip, oh yeah, so you can see all the rows. So strip row 1, and you can see the account ID, that's that parameter, custom variable right there. And then this one is different than this one. This one is different than the one above. This one's different than the one above. And yeah, so that is the strip variable, and or column variable. And it's a way for us to have a variable that's unique to each of the repeating strips. Cool, so let's move on. Next, we're going to talk about what is the read-only function used for when working with parameters. So you may or may not know that we can have read-only functions on any of our elements. And that's usually made so that, the end user cannot edit a field. They can only read it and see the value that is on it. Whereas, the parameters, why would we ever want it to be read-only when they can't read it at all? It doesn't make sense, but it will make sense now. So you can put read-only on project parameters and only project parameters to ensure that that parameter is only filled once. So, at first it may be empty, but as soon as it gets filled, it's locked, it's unable to be edited, and that can help prevent that value from changing, whether that's like internally or externally being affected. You can make sure that your project parameters are protected once they're filled. And of course, only do this if you only want that value to be filled once, so that you're able to edit it if you need it to be filled by something else later on in your project. So let me show you where you can set up the read-only function. So, let's go to our project parameters, because again, this can only be done with the project parameters and not the page parameters. Okay, so say this contact ID right here, it's only going to be filled by, say, like my URL parameter or something. Once it's filled, I don't need anybody else coming in and changing that for this particular view. And so I want to keep this locked once it is filled and keep it as read-only. So from the 3 dots right here, I can choose read-only, and that is how it's done. Say, everyone wanted it to be super protected. That is our way of doing that. So if you think that this is a use case for you, then definitely try it out and see if it works for your project. So how can URL parameters be used in our projects? Similar to Titan Forms, we can have the project parameters be included in the URL, and that can help us to create templates, emails, and personalized links so that our clients and customers can access a form and it already have their information linked within that form. And instead of having like that URL contain FLD3 equals like whatever the record ID is, instead you can just type in the project parameter name itself, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Another way that we can use URL parameters is when we are mapping the URL to an external site, and that is not used for whenever we are creating a template, but instead after the end user has accessed the site, say they are checking out a pair of shoes that they saw on your site and they want to send it to a friend, and so they copy the URL and then send it to somebody else. This ensures that the project parameter that you selected can be mapped from the end user's URL and sent to somewhere else, or if they are refreshing the screen or something, then the URL will still contain that parameter and can send them back to where they were before. So it's a very specific use case, but I just wanted to clarify that map to URL is not for whenever you are creating a template or a personalized link for somebody to access the form and have their personalized link. Let me just show you that specifically real quick. So in our project parameters, under the 3 dots, you can see map to URL, but you do not normally need to click this at all. What you do to get to the URL, let's say, we can go to preview. If you're using preview, you will use the ampersand, and then I can say contact ID equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll click enter and it will load. And although nothing happens here, we can look in the debug mode and see that my contact ID now equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I could have like actions take place because of that, have a get that runs off of this contact ID. And so this is not needed. I never had to check map to URL to have this happen. I'll show you what you use for the published version. So if you're publishing your form, instead of the ampersand, you will use the question mark. There it is. Contact ID equals 987654321. Enter. And now we can see, oh, well, we can't see it because there's no debug mode, but the debug mode would show me that the contact ID equals that. So that's how you will do it. If it's a published site, then you use the question mark, and if it's a preview, then you use the ampersand. All right, but then if you are going to be using the map to URL, that's just whenever somebody is like sending the URL. It's like once they are already in the project is loaded, and you wanted to, if they were going to send it somewhere else, or if they were going to refresh the screen, then it will be mapped within the URL for external sending. So let's just show you under tools. We can go to custom variables and say this one right here. I can say map to URL and I'll apply it. Cool. So save, and then we'll publish it, launch site. And you can see in the URL, even though I did not paste it, the contact ID is here. And so therefore, if I were to like paste this, copy, and then send it to someone else, then they would get the same output that I did since the contact ID is here. And then similarly, if I were to like refresh the page, then I'll still have that information there, where typically you would not have it there because it would reset back to the original URL. So that is what you can do with URL parameters. Let's move on to the next question. So what does save to local storage do? We have save to local storage as an option for our other project elements, but that does not apply to your parameters unless you were to specify that under your parameter settings. And just like the other things like URL parameters and read only, this is only available for the project parameters and not the page parameters, but it allows for that parameter value to be saved and all of the parameter values to be saved to the end user's local storage or cache. So if the user were to visit the site and fill out those project parameters and then exit the project, maybe their internet crashed or they are going to return at another time or something, when they come back, those project parameters will still be saved for that end user's browser. And so therefore, if there's any gets that would run based on those project parameters being filled, then they would be filled, and maybe certain things could happen from there. But again, this option is only available for project parameters, and let's just review this setting together. So within our project parameters, we can see settings down here, and it's only the only option here. So save variables to local storage. I'll click apply and save, and I have lots and lots of variables going on this page right now. Preview, debug, and you can see all of the different string and variables here I have. Let's say we were to copy, close out of this. Maybe I'll open up a new Google browser and paste it back in, and let's see if we get the information back. Yes, we got it all back because I saved my parameters to my local cache. Now, I will just recommend that you really consider the effects of saving the parameters to the local storage, because it's really not the best option for everybody. So if you have issues with it, then maybe consider another way of saving the data for your users, such as SmartV. That's a much more effective way of saving their data. How can I review and troubleshoot my parameters? One way that you can make sure that you are watching your parameters and their values is to always turn on debug mode. That is the one way that you're able to review the parameters and values, and it's going to really be helpful as you build out your projects. Another way is to use comments on each and every one of your parameters. This is going to be very important to make sure that you know what your parameters are used for, where they're being populated from, where they're passing to, and as your projects become more and more robust, you might get a little bit confused with what your parameters are doing, especially if they have similar names. So make sure that you have a good, method of naming and commenting on your parameters so that you and whoever comes after you can understand what the heck your parameters are doing. And then lastly, just ensure that the parameters are filled before you're executing actions dependent on the parameters. I've seen many people who say they're wanting an action to take place based off a parameter, and they're saying that it's not working, but the parameter is not filled before the action takes place. So you need to make sure that you say things like, when parameter is not empty, then execute X, whatever. So by using the debug mode, that can really help you to understand the flows of your parameters and the execution order of different actions in your project. So let's just review how you can set this up in your web project. So to set up debug mode, you'll go to the settings, go to tools, and it's the very first one right here. And debug mode will ensure that when you're previewing things like I have this whole time, you're able to click right here and see all of the values across your entire project or page. Of course, you're only going to see the values on each page, but you can see the page or the project variables across the entire project. So that is one way to really follow your parameters and their values and understand the flow that they're walking through. And then the other thing that I suggested was for each and every one of your variables, let's find those, you can add comments. So here, add comment gives you a lot of room to say page. Well, I guess it doesn't, you don't need to put page because it does already tell you what page they're on. You can say value from record ID to create contact records. Things like that. So that's really going to help you be specific with your variables so you understand, and whoever might be editing this form after you, this project after you, will understand the methods behind these different variables that are being passed. So I hope that this video was informative for you and that you feel more comfortable using page and project and strip and column variables and parameters in your projects. They are really going to help you create complex and robust environments for your clients and customers and end users. So if you have any questions, just leave a comment below and I'd be happy to answer or jump on a call to help you understand this better. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.